The problem of evil is the best reason I know to be a Christian. Instead of using evil as a reason not to believe in Jesus or the Christian God, I think if someone is grappling with evil, if they've experienced deep, intense suffering, they've got to be a Christian. Where else would you turn? So I want to explain why that's the case in this lecture. First of all, it's important to say that we don't have the answer for the problem of evil. Like we can't explain why someone got cancer or why they had that terrible car accident or why their spouse left them. Evil, it's very important to say this, evil is a mystery. The fall is the one part of the story of the Bible that doesn't make sense. It's not supposed to make sense. Sin is stupid, and sin makes us stupid. So we want to say right off the bat, I don't have the answer for what has happened to you. I'm not going to tell you why God has allowed this or why this has happened in your life. I don't know that. Evil's not supposed to make sense. It's evil. It's like a misshaped jigsaw piece puzzle. You can't cram it in. It's not supposed to fit. So evil is irrational, right? If you could explain evil, if you could get your arms around evil and say, oh, that's it, I figured it out. I know why that happened. Well, then guess what? What happened wouldn't be evil. Part of it being evil means it doesn't make sense. It's not supposed to make sense. But still, we Christians can say so much more about evil than anybody else can. So evil is a mystery for everyone, but Christians can say by far the most. First of all, it's important to say that theism, or belief in God, is far superior than atheism, or not believing in God, for a couple of reasons. First, the significance, the meaning of evil. What does evil even mean in a world without God? So if someone says, I can't believe in God because of evil, I would ask logically, what is evil if there is no God? Right? If there is no God, if there's no grand says who transcends all of us, who's offended by that act, you can't call it evil. At most, you can say, I prefer you not do that. I wish you hadn't done that. But who cares? It's just you. It's just your preference. Or I might say, well, my people, my community, my social group is offended by that. So what? Whole groups can be wrong, right? The Nazis proved that. To say something is evil, you mean a whole lot more than just, I prefer that not happen. My people are offended. They prefer that not happen. You mean there's someone who transcends all of us who's offended. That thing is evil. It will always be evil. So you can't actually have the conversation about evil unless you believe in God. So to say I can't believe in God because of evil, that just doesn't even make any sense. Because evil loses all content in a world without God. There's an article a few years ago in the New York Times. They have this recurring column called the Sorcerer's Stone, in which different philosophers write on different topics. And one of them was a philosopher, I think at Syracuse University, and she said, I'm an atheist. I don't believe in God. And so the theists are right. I can no longer refer to evil. I can't use the category of evil anymore because without God, what can be evil? But she said that's okay. I can still talk about what I prefer. So for instance, I prefer that we would stop slaughtering animals in these animal farms. Well, see what she did there? She used a morally loaded word like slaughter. It wasn't just her preference. She was incensed. She thought she had the moral high ground. So even when people try to say, I'm not talking about evil, I'm just talking about preference, we can't avoid actually using morally loaded words. So God is a requirement to even have the possibility of evil. So evil cannot be a good reason not to believe in God. Secondly, besides significance, think about just psychologically the security that how insecure you would feel if you thought there was evil but not God. In Calvin's Institutes, he kind of ticks off, it kind of strikes me as funny. I don't think he meant it to be funny, but he ticks off all the possible ways you could die. So he says you're riding down the street and your horse could stumble and fall, and something could fall off, a tile could fall off the roof and hit you. So you stay at home, but a snake could bite you in the garden. So you stay in bed, you get bed sores, or I mean, there's so many ways to die. Life is so precarious. So if the first one, significance, is a logical reason to believe in God, this is at least a psychological reason. Imagine believing there is such a thing as evil, but there is no God. That means evil is just kind of randomly pinging around the universe like a pinball machine. It is apt to strike you. So I would just gently tell someone who says they struggle to believe in God because of evil, well, then I don't think you really believe that, because you met me. You left your home to come have coffee. You drove down the road. Are you really saying you don't believe there's a God who's sheltering you, who's protecting you, who has your life in his hands? I think your actions belie that. The fact that you showed up tells me you think there's a God, that accidents and death won't strike you until your time is up. So, first of all, theism is way better than atheism for the significance, for the meaning of evil. Just logically, you can't even have a conversation without God. But also psychologically, you need to believe in God just to live. If you believe there's evil but no God, you wouldn't leave your house. But then, secondly, Christianity trumps all other theisms because we alone have a God who suffers. Right? For every other religion, their God is riding high up and above the fray. There's this logical conundrum. How can there be God in evil? We, again, can't answer that question fully, but we alone have a God who has suffered from evil, and in that suffering has conquered evil and defeated it. I mean, think about that. I can't tell you why evil has happened, why God allowed it, but I do know that God has allowed evil to get to him, right? Evil and the problem of evil lies at the very center of the Bible, at the very center of the Christian faith. The Christian faith makes no sense without evil. What's the greatest evil that's ever occurred? The greatest evil you could even imagine. Wouldn't it have to be the cross? The cross is the greatest injustice. The innocent Son of God dying in our place. It's unjust. It's also the greatest amount of suffering, the horror. Jesus sweat blood just anticipating it. My God, why have you forsaken me? Who can understand what happened in that moment? So the cross is the greatest evil because it's the greatest injustice and the greatest amount of suffering. Do you know why Jesus died? You do, don't you? You know exactly why Jesus died. He died to bear the sins of the world so we could be saved. He died for you. He died for me. Think about that. You know the reason. You know the reason for the greatest evil that has ever occurred, the greatest evil that ever could occur. You know exactly why that happened. So think about that. If you know the reason for the greatest evil ever, then do you have to know the reason for whatever you're suffering? I don't think so. I think we can trust God with whatever we are going through because we know the reason for a much greater evil. No other philosophy, no other religion, no other anything can touch this. So again, let me be clear. I'm not saying we have it figured out. I am not saying I have the answer for the problem of evil. Evil's a mystery. It's not supposed to make sense. It's irrational. But I am saying, if you really believe in evil and you're suffering from evil, where are you going to go? Where else can you turn except the Christian faith? We alone have a sovereign God who's fully omnipotent, fully in charge. who's offended by evil, and that's what makes it evil. And this God is not just up there. We alone have a God who is with us, not just transcendent. He's fully transcendent, but he's also fully immanent, a God who joins us in our pain and who suffers with us. No one else has that. And again, he doesn't just suffer with us, doesn't just say, I feel your pain. In his suffering, he conquers evil. So evil's the best reason I know to be a Christian. Now, how should we talk about this? God's relation to evil. This is going to sound like we're playing with words, but words really matter. Words are all we have when we're doing theology. So I think it's very important to get these words right and say that God's relationship to evil, it's negative or it's asymmetrical. God and evil have an asymmetrical relationship. God is symmetrically related to goodness. God creates goodness. God is goodness. God is for goodness. But God and evil, it's disjointed. It's off kilter. There is a connection there because God is sovereign. He's omnipotent. But he's also good, which means his connection must be asymmetrical. Here's a way that I think is the best way to say it. Evil is not outside God's decree. If you say God decrees evil, well, that sounds like God is the agent of evil. God is culpable. God himself is evil. So instead of saying God decrees evil, it's better to say that asymmetrical evil is not outside God's decree. If something happens that's outside God's decree, then God is not God. He's not fully sovereign. He's not in charge. So evil cannot be outside of his decree. But if you say God decrees evil, that's just too direct. It's too symmetrical. Here's the way Calvin said it. Men act perversely, not without God's ordination that it be done. The emphasis, the weight falls on men act perversely. We did it. We own it. We're wrong. And then in connection to God, it's negative, not without God's decree, not without God's ordination. Or maybe you've heard it, it's God's passive decree. God does not actively decree evil. He actively decrees goodness. Evil is part of God's permissive will, his passive decree. And even see how that's even a paradox, right? It's hard to grasp because decree sounds active and passive is not active. So passive decree, it's a way of getting at that God's in control, God's in charge, but it's asymmetrical, his connection to evil. So I think this illustrates the mystery, right? There are two places in our theology we will always bump up against mystery. One is the doctrine of God, because there is a God who's ontologically infinite. There's a chasm between God and us. There is a God and we are not him. And secondly, the fall. The fall is not supposed to make sense. So God's connection to the fall, it's going to be mysterious for two reasons, for both of the reasons, because we're talking about God and we're talking about evil. So we should expect there to be this asymmetrical, awkward way to talk about it. But it's important, right? It's important to emphasize God's goodness. God only decrees goodness, but his power. So there's nothing that happens that is somehow outside of his decree. So we respond to evil with, and here's the tension, with lament and with hope. As Paul said, we grieve, but not as those who have no hope. That's true. But we also hope, but not as those who do not grieve. Right? Good Christians lament. What's the first verse you ever memorized? Wasn't it Jesus wept? Think about that. Jesus wept at Lazarus' tomb. He knew he was going to make it all better in just a few moments, and yet he still wept. And so good Christians cry. We weep with those who weep because we feel the fall deep in our bones, because we know this is not the way it's supposed to be. This is not the way it was when God made this world, and it's not going to be the way when Jesus returns. So return already. Thy kingdom come. Come. The Bible ends. Come, Lord Jesus. Stop this mess. Restore all things. Fix this brokenness. Get rid of evil forever. So we lament, why hasn't that happened yet? But we lament in hope because we know that it will. And so at a Christian funeral, we cry, we weep, we miss our friend. But then we raise a fist of defiance and we say, Death, you have not won. You do not have the last word. Our friend, our loved one, will rise again. And they will live with us here forever on this restored earth. So Christians can't solve the problem of evil. No one can. But man, if we can't say more about evil than anybody else. You have to believe in God, or evil makes no sense. But which God would you believe in? How about the one who has suffered from evil more than anyone ever can, and in that suffering has conquered it forever? That's the God we need. And that's the only God there is. So, are you suffering from evil? Are you grappling with injustice and pain? There's only one possible place to turn. Run to Jesus. Evil's the best reason I know to give your life to Christ.